A simple woman, denied at bank, Tevenor. 7 minutes later, her billionaire husband walks in. You won't believe how appearances can deceive one. Quiet morning at a busy Bank of America branch in Manhattan, a woman named Lucy, wearing faded jeans and a plain t-shirt, found herself denied, belittled, and humiliated by the very people supposed to serve her. Little did they know she was married to Henry C. Albright, a secretive billionaire whose financial empire stretched from Wall Street all the way to Tokyo. But Lucy wasn't the type to brag or flaunt her wealth. 7 minutes later, everything changed, and those who had looked down on her would experience a shocking reversal of fortune that none of them saw coming. Lucy stood on the sidewalk across from a towering skyscraper in Manhattan, scanning the entrance to the Bank of America branch on West 42nd Street. The city around her buzzed with relentless energy. The rumble of buses, the swish of taxi tires, and the occasional screech of brakes at a nearby traffic light. Pedestrians marched with purpose, phone conversations blending into a subdued chorus of city life. Yet Lucy took it all in with a sort of quiet fascination. She had grown up on a modest farm in Nebraska, where life was simpler and time seemed to stand still. The speed and glamour of New York City, even after years of living there, still dazzled her. She tucked a stray lock of chestnut-brown hair behind her ear and adjusted the strap of a sensible canvas bag slung over her shoulder. Unlike the throngs of finance professionals in tailored suits, Lucy wore simple flats and a plain cotton blouse, though she could afford any designer outfit she wanted. Thanks to her husband, Henry's massive fortune, she often chose comfort over flashy brands. It was her small act of rebellion in a world obsessed with material status. Henry respected that. In fact, it was one of the many reasons he loved her. Her authenticity, her humility, her down-to-earth spirit. Before marrying Henry C. Albright, Lucy's life had been marked by resilience. Raised by a single mother who worked 2 jobs, Lucy learned from a young age how to stretch a dollar and appreciate every blessing. Her father, a truck driver, had died in an accident when she was 6, leaving her mother to juggle rent, groceries, and Lucy's school fees all on her own. Some days Lucy remembered rummaging through discount bins at second-hand stores, searching for items that were not only affordable but also sturdy enough to last. Lucy's modest upbringing gave her a unique perspective. Even after her marriage to Henry, a man whose portfolio included large chunks of real estate in New York, Chicago, and London, not to mention tech startups in Silicon Valley, she refused to become someone else. She believed in always being herself, no matter how big her bank account had grown. Yet to outsiders, her simple appearance often led to misunderstandings. It wouldn't be the first time someone underestimated her. And as fate would have it, that day at Bank of America would prove to be one of the biggest demonstrations of that painful truth. The revolving door whooshed behind Lucy as she walked into the spacious Bank of America lobby. Marble floors gleamed under chandeliers that sparkled in the overhead lighting. Neat rows of high-backed chairs lined the waiting area, each occupied by a customer tapping away on their phone or quietly perusing some brochure. Giant LCD screens displayed scrolling stock tickers, while a security guard looked on from a podium near the entrance. Lucy clutched an envelope containing a check for a substantial sum money, set aside for a community project she and Henry were funding in the Bronx, an educational center for underprivileged youth. The donation had been in the works for months, and Lucy had insisted on delivering it personally. She wanted to feel the tangible act of handing over a check for a cause she believed in. It was who she was, a hands-on philanthropist. Yet, as she headed to the counter, Lucy felt a slight pang of anxiety. For all the times she had dealt with banks, there was always a chance that a teller or manager would greet her with suspicion. And sure enough, the look from the manager on duty, a sharply dressed man named Ronald Davies, did not bode well. Ronald Davies was in his late 30s, sporting a crisp navy suit and a tie that probably cost more than Lucy's entire outfit. His hair was immaculately gelled into place, and he exuded the confident swagger of someone who believed he owned every room he walked into. Ronald prided himself on working at one of Manhattan's busiest branches of Bank of America. He liked to say that the city was full of dreamers, but not everyone could fulfill their dreams. Only those who had the right connections and the right look. When Lucy approached the counter, Ronald tapped his pen impatiently, glancing at the outdated phone Lucy pulled from her bag. Immediately, he made assumptions. The woman's clothes seemed too plain for Midtown Manhattan. Her phone was an older model, and the envelope she held looked like something you'd buy in a discount store. Ronald formed a mental narrative within seconds, another small-town nobody trying to do something well out of her league. The conversation started politely enough. Lucy gave a soft greeting and mentioned she wanted to deposit a check into an account. Ronald nodded but didn't smile. He held out his hand as Lucy passed him the envelope. When he opened it, Ronald's eyes went wide. It was a check from the Albright Family Philanthropic Fund, a real non-profit entity Lucy and Henry had founded, and it was for a sum of $2 million. Ronald's first reaction wasn't awe but suspicion. He frowned deeply, looking Lucy up and down. How could a woman who appeared so unremarkable be walking around with a check like this? He asked Lucy for her ID, which she presented. He examined it briefly, then tapped away on his computer. As the system processed her information, Ronald grew increasingly dubious. He noticed the name Lucy Albright in the system, but ironically, the bank software needed additional verification because the transaction was so large. Ronald pursed his lips. "Mrs. Albright, I'm afraid I'm going to have to verify the authenticity of this check. We have certain procedures Lucy used to." Formality nodded. "Of course, take your time." He gave her a stiff, unconvincing smile before pressing a button on his phone. A supervisor named Gretchen approached, a stern expression on her face. Ronald explained the situation. Lucy stood quietly, clasping her hands in front of her, wishing the process didn't have to be so adversarial. She understood the necessity of bank checks and balances, but the condescending tone in Ronald's voice made it clear he believed her to be a fraud. Gretchen disappeared into a back office, presumably to run more in-depth checks on Lucy's background or the philanthropic fund. Lucy felt heat rise to her cheeks as people in line behind her started to shuffle and stare. She could almost hear their thoughts. Why is this woman holding up the line with her suspicious check? Even as the minutes dragged on, Lucy fought the urge to defend herself loudly. She'd been taught to remain patient and respectful, no matter how others behaved. She reminded herself of the reason for her deposit, the soon-to-be-completed education center that would house after-school tutoring programs and vocational training. If it helped even one young person find their path, this awkward wait would be worth it. When Gretchen returned, she handed the check back to Ronald, shaking her head. "We can't accept this without additional proof of identity," Gretchen said, as though Lucy had just tried to deposit a personal note scribbled on a napkin. Lucy's voice trembled slightly. "What do you mean? Additional proof of identity?" "I have my ID. I can give you my bank account number. You can even call my husband's office. We've done transactions like this before." Ronald cleared his throat, leaning forward. "Ma'am, we're not trying to cause trouble. But let's face it, you don't exactly look like someone who belongs to a philanthropic family organization. We get a lot of suspicious activity here, and we have a duty to protect the bank's interests." Lucy's cheeks burned. She wondered if she should mention her husband's name. But Henry had always said to only use his name if necessary. He wanted Lucy to feel empowered in her own right, not overshadowed by his reputation. In fact, Lucy rarely liked to bring up Henry's billions, because she hated the way people's eyes lit up with dollar signs once they knew who she was. But if that was the only way to secure the deposit, so be it. "This check," Lucy said calmly, "is from the Albright family, philanthropic fund. I'm Lucy Albright. My husband Henry Albright and I founded that organization 3 years ago. We've done business with Bank of America, with this very branch before. All the details should be in your system." Ronald raised an eyebrow. "Henry Albright, the real estate and tech mogul. You're his wife." He tried to stifle a disbelieving laugh, but failed. In his mind, the wife of a billionaire would step out of a limousine wearing a designer suit, not dusty flats, and an off-brand blouse. "Look, even if you are Lucy Albright, protocol demands we freeze these funds until we verify everything. That can take days. Maybe a week." Lucy's stomach clenched. She was tempted to walk out, but she needed to finalize the deposit so the educational center's funding could proceed. Construction deadlines loomed, and the staff at the future facility depended on these funds to buy computers, desks, and textbooks. Lucy swallowed her pride. "Is there anything else I can provide right now?" Ronald shrugged. "You might consider returning with some form of official verification from your husband or from the philanthropic fund that explicitly states you have authority to make this deposit, or maybe bring Mr. Albright himself. That would speed things up." The words sank like a stone in Lucy's gut. She knew Henry was in a conference across town, but she also knew he cared about this project. However, she despised the idea that she had to prove herself by dragging her husband into it. She was an official signatory. The bank had her on record. There was no logical reason to withhold her deposit. While Ronald and Gretchen turned to speak with a colleague, Lucy took a step back from the counter. A young woman in line behind her whispered loudly to her friend. "She's obviously lying. Probably found a blank check or something." Another man snorted. "She claims she's a billionaire's wife, but she can't even afford a decent outfit." Lucy's hands clenched into fists inside her sweater pockets, yet she maintained her outward composure. She tried to quell the tears of frustration welling in her eyes. Never did she imagine she'd be so openly mocked by strangers. "Focus on the greater goal," Lucy told herself. "This deposit will change lives. Don't lose your temper." After a few more minutes of whispered discussions between Ronald, Gretchen, and a higher-up who had appeared, Lucy was informed that there was no way to proceed with the deposit that day. The check would need to be held until further notice. "You're welcome to take your check back," Ronald said, holding it out to her as though it might be contaminated. "Once you have official confirmation, we'll consider verifying it. But I'm not making any promises on the timeline." Lucy stared at the check, then at Ronald's stony face, and felt a surge of anger that she fought to contain. She grabbed the check, slid it back into her envelope, and turned on her heel. Her departure was watched by everyone in line, an audience to her embarrassment. Outside the bank, she pressed her back against the cool stone facade of the building, struggling to calm her heart rate. She wanted to call Henry right away, but hesitated. He was in the middle of finalizing an acquisition deal with an overseas firm, an important piece of his business strategy. Lucy loathed the idea of interrupting him just because she had faced a rude manager. Wasn't she capable of resolving this on her own? Yet the tears were there, threatening to fall. She inhaled deeply, trying to compose herself. She knew Henry would want to know, especially since the deposit was urgent. Eventually, Lucy couldn't ignore the timeline any longer. She reached for her phone and dialed Henry's number. Henry C. Albright was sitting in a corner office overlooking Central Park, flanked by attorneys and a translator working through a teleconference with an executive in Japan. When his phone buzzed, Henry, against all protocol, checked the caller ID Lucy. She rarely interrupted him during a meeting, so Henry excused himself and stepped out. "Sweetheart, is everything okay?" he asked gently. Lucy's voice wavered. She tried to keep the words steady, but the frustration she'd been bottling up escaped. She recounted the entire humiliating scenario. Henry listened intently, his voice measured when he finally responded. "I'm so sorry you went through that." "Don't worry, I'll be there in 10 minutes. But your meeting?" "It can wait," Henry said firmly. "Nothing's more important than standing by you. You're my partner. I'll be right there." Lucy didn't expect him to show up quite so fast. Yet just 7 minutes after the call ended, she spotted Henry jogging toward her in a crisp, tailored suit. Tie slightly askew, his hair usually perfectly groomed, looked mussed by the brisk walk he had taken from his driver's drop-off point. The expression on his face was equal parts concern and anger, directed not at Lucy but at anyone who dared mistreat her. He immediately wrapped Lucy in a hug, ignoring the curious glances from passers-by. "Let's fix this," he whispered, kissing her temple. Lucy felt a rush of relief. She'd never wanted to rely on his presence to handle her problems, but she was grateful he was here. Henry took Lucy's hand, and together they re-entered the Bank of America. Lobby, the same security guard eyed them, but this time Henry's commanding presence drew an entirely different reaction. Heads turned. Some recognized him from newspaper articles and television interviews. The hush that fell across the bank was palpable as the staff realized a wealthy, influential client had just strolled in. Ronald, who had been chatting with Gretchen at the counter, did a double-take. He froze, scanning Henry's face. Recognition dawned. Ronald swallowed nervously, adjusting his tie, and then stepped forward with a forced, ingratiating smile. "Mr. Albright." What a surprise. Henry's eyes, usually warm, were cold with fury. "I understand you denied my wife's attempt to deposit a check. Our check for a philanthropic fund we operate." "Care to explain?" Ronald cleared his throat. We just needed to verify." "My wife is an authorized signatory." Henry cut him off. "Which means she doesn't need my permission to deposit funds into an account we hold jointly. Are you suggesting she committed fraud?" Gretchen tried to step in. No, Mr. Albright, we have procedures. She showed you her ID, correct? And we have an existing relationship with your bank. Have we not deposited checks like this before?" Ronald mumbled incoherently. Lucy stood beside Henry, feeling both vindicated and embarrassed by the spectacle. She wished it hadn't come to this showdown in a crowded lobby, but there was no going back now. At that moment, the branch manager, a middle-aged woman named Harriet Mason, emerged from a back office. She quickly sized up the situation and approached, trying to salvage it. "Mr. Albright, Mrs. Albright, please step into my office," Harriet suggested, waving them toward a glass-paneled door. The pair followed, leaving Ronald and Gretchen behind, their faces red with a mix of guilt and panic. Inside the manager's office, the decor was sleek and modern, a testament to Harriet's position in a high-end Manhattan branch. She offered them seats on plush leather chairs. Henry, however, chose to remain standing. Harriet's eyes flicked with nervousness. "I'm sorry for any inconvenience. We have strict guidelines for large checks, you understand." Henry set the check envelope on Harriet's desk. "I understand guidelines, but I also understand my wife's name is on the account. She's not a stranger." Why was she treated so poorly? Harriet inhaled, stalling. It appears our staff was overly cautious. But let's settle this quickly. If you'll allow me to process the check personally, I'll ensure it goes into the correct account without further delay. Harriet typed away on her computer, occasionally requesting Lucy's driver's license and a second form of ID. Lucy produced both. Within moments, Harriet nodded. All set. The deposit is confirmed. She looked up, forcing a smile. Again, our sincerest apologies. Henry relaxed slightly, relieved the deposit was finally processed. But Lucy felt the sting of how she'd been treated. She said quietly, "Thank you, but it shouldn't take my husband's presence to do something that was already my right to do." Harriet looked genuinely chagrined. "You're right, and I do apologize. I'll have a word with Mr. Davies about this." Before Henry and Lucy could exit the office, Harriet asked them to wait. Moments later, she summoned Ronald Davies inside. Ronald entered his posture. Tense, Harriet pinned him with a stare. "Davies, would you care to explain why you deemed it necessary to withhold a legitimate deposit from a long-standing client?" Ronald's words stumbled. I was following protocol, the appearance of the customer." Lucy flinched at that choice of words, while Henry's eyes narrowed. "The appearance," Henry echoed. "Is that how you judge who is legitimate and who isn't?" Ronald swallowed hard. "Sir, I'm sorry if I offended you. It's just that we deal with many fraudulent checks. We can't be too careful." Henry let out a slow breath. "You can be careful without being rude or dismissive. Mr. Davies, my wife has the same rights in this bank that I do." Instead of offering a sincere apology, Ronald doubled down. He continued to talk about statistical likelihoods and customer profiles, seeming to suggest Lucy's plain attire made her less credible. Lucy felt sick to her stomach, listening to him rationalize the humiliation he had inflicted on her. Harriet cut him off. "Mr. Davies, that will be enough. I've heard enough to determine that your actions were not only discourteous, but also in direct violation of our customer service principles. I'm going to file a formal report." Henry nodded his appreciation at Harriet, but Lucy sensed he was still furious at the blatant discrimination. Ronald, meanwhile, looked as though he might collapse from the stress of the impending disciplinary action. Despite her anger, Lucy felt a tinge of pity for Ronald. She remembered all too well her own experiences of struggling to find a job because of assumptions people made about her. She spoke softly. "Mr. Davies, I don't want you to lose your job, but I do want you to realize how hurtful it is to judge people by their appearance. Next time, look at the documentation carefully, not the clothes." Ronald stared at her, astonished by her empathy. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. Lucy gave him a gentle nod. She wasn't seeking revenge, only fairness and respect. As they left Harriet's office, Henry and Lucy discovered that rumors of Henry's presence had already spread throughout the branch. A few opportunistic onlookers had snapped pictures or recorded short video clips on their phones. It didn't help that Henry was well known. His face had graced more than a few covers of business magazines. By the time Henry and Lucy stepped back into the main lobby, a local news freelancer, who happened to be in the bank for a different story, recognized Henry and tried to approach him with questions. "Mr. Albright, is it true your wife was just discriminated against at the counter? Do you have any statement to make about the bank's policies?" Henry and Lucy exchanged a glance. Neither wanted to fan the flames of a viral scandal. Lucy simply shook her head. "We've resolved the issue privately," she said quietly. Offering no further comment, the reporter, disappointed, tried a few more questions, but Henry guided Lucy away gently, stepping out into the fresh air. Lucy breathed deeply. Henry reached for her hand. "Are you okay?" he asked, genuine concern in his eyes. She let out a long exhale. "I am now. Thank you for coming so quickly. It's the least I could do," Henry said, his voice earnest. "No one should treat you like that. You never have to prove your worth to anyone." Lucy's eyes watered, but this time with gratitude rather than frustration. She leaned against him, letting the chaotic streets of Manhattan fade into the background for a moment. Then she turned her gaze to the busy avenue. "I just hope they don't treat anyone else that way." Back inside the bank, Harriet Mason was still reeling from the fiasco, and she decided to hold an emergency staff meeting that very afternoon. She gathered Ronald Gretchen and the other employees to remind them of Bank of America's corporate policy: no discrimination or profiling based on appearance or assumptions. The fiasco with Lucy Albright made Harriet realize how easily public trust could be damaged by a single employee's bias. Ronald in particular felt the brunt of Harriet's frustration. It wasn't just about nearly losing an important client, but about the principles the bank claimed to stand for: customer service, inclusivity, and respect. If any lesson was learned that day, it was that sometimes the simplest-looking person might hold the most surprising story. That evening, Lucy and Henry returned to their penthouse overlooking the Hudson River. Floor-to-ceiling windows captured the city's glittering skyline. Lucy sank into a plush sofa, feeling emotionally spent. Henry loosened his tie and grabbed 2 mugs, setting a kettle to boil for tea. He joined her on the sofa, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. Lucy thought back to her childhood. She recalled picking wildflowers in Nebraska, skipping stones across a pond, and watching her mother sigh over piles of unpaid bills at the kitchen table. In those days, Lucy had vowed to someday use whatever blessings she received to help others who struggled like she once had. That vow was why she had founded the Albright Family Philanthropic Fund with Henry, and she would continue to do so, no matter how many bankers or strangers underestimated her. A few weeks later, the deposit Lucy had fought so hard to make was finally transforming into a reality. Construction resumed at the nearly completed educational center in the Bronx, and Lucy and Henry visited one bright afternoon to check on the progress. The building had a modern brick facade, large windows, and a sign that read Albright Community Education Center, with the tagline, "Empowering our youth workers," bustled about, installing wiring, painting walls, and testing out newly delivered desks. A cluster of local teens watched curiously from the sidewalk. Lucy smiled and waved at them. She could hardly wait to see the halls filled with young people gaining skills, mentorship, and hope for their futures. To Lucy's surprise, a figure approached her from inside the center. It was Ronald Davies, dressed in casual clothes, looking a bit out of place. He held a small bouquet of flowers, his expression timid. Lucy blinked, startled to see the man who had humiliated her at the bank now on the doorstep of her philanthropic project. Mrs. Albright, Ronald said, quietly, extending the flowers. "I came to apologize. I know the bank suspended me for 2 weeks, and I might lose my job altogether. I've been doing some soul-searching. I realized how wrong I was to judge you, and I wanted to see what this place was. What you're doing here." Lucy glanced at Henry, who stood nearby, arms folded. Henry didn't look pleased at first, but Lucy laid a hand on his arm, signaling she wanted to hear Ronald out. Ronald's voice quivered slightly. "I grew up in a rough neighborhood myself. I had to fight my way through school and eventually landed a job at the bank. I always thought presenting myself in suits and ties was the key to respect. In the process, I started judging people who looked like I used to, people who didn't have the privilege of designer clothing. It was wrong. really wrong. And seeing you someone who has all the wealth in the world, but dresses in a normal, humble way, broke my whole worldview. I'm sorry. Lucy's heart softened at his confession. Thank you for coming here and being honest, she said. It takes courage to admit mistakes. Ronald wiped his brow, glancing around the busy construction site. If I keep my job, I want to change the way I interact with people at the bank. But if I lose it, well, I still want to do something meaningful. When I heard about this educational center, I thought, maybe I could volunteer, teach basic financial literacy to these kids, help them understand banking and money management. Lucy turned to Henry, seeing a flicker of surprise in his eyes. Ronald's proposal was unexpected, but it had merit. Many students in underprivileged neighborhoods had no access to practical financial education. Lucy nodded slowly. We'd be open to that. Our center will have workshops and mentorship programs. We're looking for people who can give their time. Ronald's entire face lit up with relief and gratitude. That would mean everything to me. In the weeks that followed, Ronald kept his word. While the bank investigated his actions, Harriet Mason recommended he undergo retraining. Ronald spent his weekends at the Albright Community Education Center, helping kids learn how to open checking accounts, save money, and even start small business ideas in their neighborhoods. He discovered a renewed sense of purpose and realized that humility and compassion could yield far more respect than any expensive suit. Lucy, watching from the sidelines, felt that a strange yet fitting sort of karma had played out. Ronald, who once belittled her, was now using his knowledge to empower the very people he might have dismissed based on appearance. The educational center became a symbol of second chances and new beginnings. Months later, as the Albright Community Education Center officially opened its doors, Lucy gave a small speech at the ribbon-cutting ceremony. She spoke of her humble upbringing, her dream of sharing opportunity with those who might not otherwise have it, and the vital importance of seeing beyond appearances. Henry stood proudly by her side. The press, always eager to cover an Albright philanthropic project, gathered to capture the moment. Ronald Davies, no longer suspended, quietly stood in the crowd, smiling as he watched the community welcome Lucy's words. The meltdown at the bank had turned into a powerful lesson for everyone involved. Lucy had proven that humility and perseverance would always triumph over superficial judgments. Ronald had learned that true respect is earned through kindness, not condescension. And Henry had shown once again that loyalty to loved ones and to a noble cause mattered more than any business deal. In a single day, Lucy had faced humiliation, found unexpected redemption, and changed at least one person's life. She carried herself with the same grace she always had, but now she possessed an even deeper conviction. Never let anyone tell you that you can't do something simply because you don't fit their narrow vision of who you should be. Thank you for watching this unforgettable tale of humility, hidden strength, and the power of second chances. Lucy's story reminds us all that appearances can be misleading, and that true worth is measured not by designer clothes or flashy accessories, but by integrity and genuine compassion. We've seen how a moment of bias can create humiliation and anger. Yet we've also witnessed the transformative power of empathy, forgiveness, and personal growth. If this story resonated with you, if it inspired you, or even made you think twice about how you treat others, please show your support by liking this video, sharing it with friends, and subscribing to our channel. By doing so, you'll help spread these uplifting messages even further. Together, let's continue shining a light on the lessons that remind us of our shared humanity and the impact one humble act of kindness can have on the world.